seeking for justice, for a brighter future. Let's do this together in peace and harmony. CC could take us there to the promised land. No one will stop us now. No, 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 no.
With sincerity, fidelity, and unity, we will achieve the best in Africa. I am the fullest, the return of ancestors. Thank you.
What we are fighting here is so simple. That let there be a plebiscite. Simple.
Without much ado, I want to say welcome, and I look forward to having lively debates on the issue of Cameroon. Cameroon, which is made up of English-speaking, Cameroon, which is made of French-speaking, Cameroon, which has these what you call binaries of colonialism. Ladies and gentlemen, let's give a big hand to the great debaters of today.
On our side, we prefer a world where Pan-Africanism preaches the integrity and the identity of oppressed individuals and allows them to become emancipated individuals and to self-actualize. From our side, we see that no people join a political union to be oppressed by that same political union, especially when they expected that political union to adhere to their own interests, to allow them to become emancipated individuals, and to allow them to self-actualize. The South Cameroonians have suffered for far too long, and we think it's high time that we provide the justice and freedom that they deserve. What we propose on our side is to allow these individuals to form the state of Ambazonia that they want, because we think this is a form of justice and the freedom that they deserve as individuals who are South Cameroonians and who have an identity that is unique to themselves and must be protected. This speech would be characterized by two folds. Firstly, I'll be talking about the history behind this whole problem. Then secondly, I'll be linking that particular history to why that means and justifies the fact or the call for freedom and justice for the South Cameroonians. Firstly, the genesis of the problem is the German colonization of Cameroon. So the reason why this is important is because Germany lost the Cameroon to both Britain and France, and as a result, they partitioned the state, which meant that the state was divided into British Cameroon and French Cameroon. The British Cameroon was further divided into the North and South Cameroon, but the most important thing to see in today's debate is the South Cameroonians who are still being oppressed by the state of Cameroon and the central government. The reason why this is important is because a small number of individuals, right, coming from the French Cameroon were individuals that still adhere to the former concept of Cameroon that was under the German control, which means these particular individuals wanted a state that was reunited, wanted a state that united both South Cameroonians and French Cameroonians without recognizing the distinct nature of the colonization process that they went through, without recognizing the distinct identity of these particular individuals. It is important to note that given that the German colonization was really limited in time, and given that the British and French rule was really stringent and was really long term, it meant that the identity that these individuals formed was directly linked to both Britain and France, and not necessarily to the former conception of the British, or former conception of Germany. It's really, really important because this is the genesis of the whole problem, and really, really important. The individuals that were pushing for this particular identity or unification of both Southern Cameroonian and French Cameroon were, for example, RJK Kibonje, who formed the French Commonwealth Welfare Union in British Cameroon. Right? What this movement or party wanted was to promote the idea of unification within British Cameroon, which meant that it was only a small minority or elite group of individuals and political actors who wanted this. Another example, especially on the British side, was the Dr. E.M.L. Ndeli, who formed the Cameroonian Youth League and joined the Front Cameroonian Western Welfare Union to form the Cameroonian New Front, right? The reason why this is all important as a form of historical concept was that most of these particular political leaders were forming these particular political parties for political emancipation of their own regions, especially for British Cameroon, and to advance their own political agenda and political careers. The reason why this is important, especially on the two fronts that we're talking about, the Southern Cameroonian individuals and French Cameroon. When you take a look at France Cameroon, given that a small number of people wanted this new identity, they wanted to push it onto the other individuals and allow that concept of unification to exist. But for the British individuals, or people that were under the British control, that is the Southern Cameroonians, what they wanted was a secession from Eastern Nigeria, because both of these two states or two territories were trusteeship territories under both Britain and France, which meant that given that the Southern Cameroonians were being seen as trusteeships of Britain, they were not necessarily being treated in the way that most trusteeships are supposed to be treated. That is, they were not given the autonomous nature that most trusteeships were, and therefore they were seen as just an appendage of, for example, Eastern Nigeria. This was a huge problem for the identity of Southern Cameroonians because they were always being marginalized by the Igbo people, which meant that they needed to be free and they needed to have a state of their own, an identity that is unique to themselves. A reunification is one that was unjustified and meted out so many problems onto them. Now let's just move on to the political process and so the other processes that led to this whole unification agenda and the current Cameroon as we have it now. So what happened was that these particular political parties, as a result of so many political upheavals, went to the United Nations to be able to have a plebiscite, right? And I've jumped something here, but it's really important to note this particular plebiscite. So the basis of the particular plebiscite was to ask individuals that lived within these particular territories whether they still wanted to be a part of Eastern Nigeria or to move on to French Cameroon. The reason why this is important is because when they went to the United Nations for the first time, they couldn't agree on the questions for the particular plebiscite, which meant that they had to come back to the Manfrey region that our co-individuals spoke about and had to decide on what the questions would be. There were 3 questions or possible questions that could have been asked in that particular plebiscite. Firstly, integration with Eastern Nigeria. Second, secession from Eastern Nigeria. And third, integration with French Cameroon. At the end of that particular all-party conference, right, all parties came together and decided that the 2 most important questions that adhere to the identity of the Southern Cameroonians was whether they would integrate with Eastern Nigeria or secede from Eastern Nigeria. When they sent this resolution to the United Nations, given the incentive that the United Nations had, for example, they wanted to seem as individuals that supported the anti-colonial movement within Africa that was being spearheaded by Nkrumah. So what they did was they tweaked the resolution, which meant that the question that had to be asked as a result of the plebiscite was not the original questions that most individuals voted for, that most individuals wanted. The questions then became integration and integration with Eastern Nigeria and integration with French Cameroon, which was not something that these particular individuals wanted because they wanted autonomy from Eastern Nigeria and not necessarily the option of moving into French Cameroon. There were some political individuals and political leaders who wanted to move into French Cameroon, but they thought that this was an action that had a long-term goal. That's to say, they wanted to succeed now and have their own self-autonomy and then think about joining French Cameroon at a later date, which meant, very, very important, that the interest of Southern Cameroonians was to have their own state. Why is it therefore an action that is it being an unjust action? First, because we see that given that there was reluctance to join these particular individuals in the first place, the French Cameroonians, and the only reason why they did join them was because the United Nations tweaked the questions that would be asked. These particular individuals therefore have no choice because they didn't want to live in Eastern Nigeria where they were always going to be oppressed by these particular Eastern Nigerian people. Right? The only option therefore was to join French Cameroon, which meant that their choices were heavily limited and therefore there was injustice on this particular individual. Secondly, we see that even in the status quo, this particular individuals continuously being oppressed by this particular French government that stays in French Cameroon. An example of this is the fact that in Southern Cameroon, for example, lawyers are coming from the French part of Cameroon to set up laws and to judge laws under Southern Cameroonian land, which means that in most cases they are not meting out justice to the people that deserve it. This is a huge injustice and under any democratic system, I think it's really, really important. Because the laws of any particular state or the laws of any particular territory embody the identity of this particular individual and allow for emancipation. If individuals probably don't even understand English are setting up laws and are judging laws on their own land, I think it's a huge injustice because it means we will not be able to accept any form of closure or against any form of closure. But the worst part of all these problems is the fact that given that these particular individuals, for example, want their own territories and want their own Ambazonia, the fact that they try to protest peacefully is something that must be accepted by any well-thinking government. In the status quo, these particular individuals are continuously being oppressed, are continuously being murdered, and there are thousands and thousands of civilians that have been displaced, which meant that all of these problems date back to the misinterpretation of what that plebiscite was and could have been, and therefore the fact that people are continuously being misplaced and displaced and being killed by French security forces means that it's an unjust act and that the harm is huge. At the end of the day, panel, ladies and gentlemen, if you have formed a political union, the idea of that political union is to benefit from that political union. If that political union represses your own individuals, kills your own citizens, we think it is wrong. We think that it is high time that we have a new conception of Pan-Africanism, a Pan-Africanism that allows for individual interests, individual identities to still exist and still allow for integration. Not one that says that integration must happen at the cost of individual identities. We think it's really, really important. Vote for Vandals. Thank you.
Not today, nobody go sees us to jubilate. Nelson Mandela and Nkrumah, it's now Sisi Kustan. Hey, Africa, hey, Africa, hey, Africa, hey, Africa, hey, Africa, hey, Africa, hey. Come together, help your brother, hey, Africa, hey. Dance together, love another, hey, Africa, hey.
Mama Liliana Yutabe. Popular women are behind you, Mama Ambazonia. We live in Paris. Ambazonia déclare, levez-vous. Milana Tam, le stratège, picking for Ambazonia. Honorable Weaver, warrior from Jakiri. Justice Amos. From West Africa, diplomacy, ahead. Watana.